My cute neighbor's daughter handed me a note that said, "Will you marry my mommy? Circle yes or no." And I stood frozen in my own driveway with a crayon-scrawled marriage proposal shaking in my hands. I was the broken man next door who'd called off my own wedding and moved to Larkspur Lane to disappear. But this little 8-year-old with flying pigtails had just decided, with the fierce certainty only a child can carry, that I was the one meant to fix her family. She was the daughter of a widow, a girl who still said my dad used to like the words might spill, and she'd handed me that note like it was the most important question in the world. But when I looked up to laugh it off, to say something easy, her mom was standing 3 feet behind her, laundry basket on her hip, absolutely frozen, having heard every single word. So why would a grieving little girl beg a stranger to marry her mommy? What had this quiet widow been too afraid to say out loud? And what was I supposed to do, with her daughter watching, her mother mortified, and a crayon box asking me to circle yes or no? I stood frozen in my own driveway with a crayon-scrawled marriage proposal shaking in my hands. The paper trembled between my fingers like it weighed 10 pounds instead of nothing at all. Rake still leaning against my leg. Leaves half swept into a pile behind me. And in front of me, an 8-year-old girl named Poppy stood with her chin lifted high, pigtails still swinging from the sprint she'd just taken across 2 lawns to reach me. Like this couldn't wait one more second. "I have a question for you," she'd said, marching up like a tiny judge delivering a verdict. "It's very important. You have to answer honestly." I should have laughed it off right there. I almost did. But then she pushed the note into my hands, and the words on it hit me like a wave I never saw coming. "Will you marry my mommy? Circle yes or no." 2 boxes drawn underneath in fat, uneven crayon. One with hearts scribbled around it. One with a little rain cloud. Clearly the no box, clearly designed by a child ruthless enough to make rejection feel like a crime. My throat went dry. My hands didn't know what to do with themselves. 6 months earlier, I'd stood in front of a church full of people I loved and called off my own wedding 3 weeks before it happened. I moved to Larkspur Lane after that. Quiet street, quiet house, quiet life, because the plan was simple. Disappear. Deal. Never let anyone hand me anything with the word marry on it again. And now an 8-year-old had just torn that plan into confetti with a piece of construction paper. I opened my mouth to say something easy, something deflecting. "Cute, sweetheart, but that's between grown-ups." Something like that. I looked up to say it. And that's when I saw her, Claire, standing 3 feet behind her daughter, laundry basket balanced on one hip, absolutely frozen. Like the whole world had gone silent around her. Her mouth was slightly open. Her eyes were wide with a horror so pure it would have been funny if it wasn't also breaking my heart a little. She'd heard every single word. "Poppy Grace Bennett," Claire said, her voice cracking somewhere between fury and disbelief. "What did you do?" "I did the responsible thing." Poppy didn't even flinch. "You said grown-ups are supposed to communicate their feelings. So I communicated." I almost dropped the note. Because this wasn't just a kid being cute. This was a kid who'd clearly been watching her mother go quiet every time I walked by, watching her mother laugh a little too easily at things that weren't that funny, watching 2 adults circle each other for months without either one saying the one thing that mattered. And there was something else underneath it. Something heavier. Poppy's father had died in a car accident almost 2 years earlier. A drunk driver. A rain-soaked road. One phone call that split her whole life into before and after. I'd learned that in pieces over the months. Never all at once, because grief doesn't hand itself over easily. Especially not from an 8-year-old who still said my dad used to like the words might spill out of her and never come back. This note wasn't just matchmaking. This was a little girl who missed having a family at the dinner table, and had decided, with the fierce, uncomplicated logic only a child can carry, that I was the missing piece. That's what nearly broke me standing there. "You don't have to," Claire started, already stepping forward to snatch the humiliation out of my hands. "She's been watching too many wedding shows. I swear, she's not usually." "Mommy," Poppy said, patient as a tiny lawyer. "I already asked him. It's rude to take back a question." And somehow, God knows how, I laughed. Really laughed. The kind that comes from somewhere you forgot was still working. Claire's shoulders dropped an inch when she heard it. like she'd been bracing for me to bolt and hadn't expected the sound of my laughter instead. I crouched down to Poppy's eye level, note still trembling slightly in my hand. "This is a big decision," I told her, keeping my voice as serious as hers had been. "I need time to think about it properly." Poppy studied me the way a judge studies a defendant's excuse. "You have until Friday." Then she turned and skipped toward the dog like she just closed a business deal, leaving her mother standing in the wreckage of her dignity, and leaving me standing there holding a piece of paper that suddenly felt like it weighed more than anything I'd held in years. Claire covered her face with one hand. "I am going to sit her down and have a very long talk about boundaries." I looked down at the note, at the crayon hearts, at the little rain cloud drawn like a threat, and some small, terrified part of me, the part that had spent 6 months trying to disappear on the street, realized it didn't want to circle no. But Friday was 3 days away, and I had absolutely no idea what I was going to do when it came. Friday came faster than I wanted it to. I spent 3 days rehearsing what I'd say, and none of it felt right. Every version sounded like an excuse. Every version sounded like the same fear that made me leave a church full of people 6 months ago. The fear that loving something means eventually losing it. But here's the thing about a fear like that. It doesn't stay quiet forever. It waits for a reason to speak up. And Poppy had just given it one. I started noticing things I hadn't let myself notice before. The porch light Claire always left on, even in summer, like she was still waiting for someone to come home. The way she flinched just slightly whenever a car passed too fast on the road outside. The way she'd laugh at something small and then catch herself like laughing too loud felt like betrayal. I didn't know the full story yet, but I was starting to feel the shape of it. So instead of saying anything, I did what I always did. I showed up. Poppy's bike chain fell off in my driveway on Wednesday, and I got down on my knees in the gravel and fixed it while she narrated, with total confidence, exactly how a bike engine works. None of it true, all of it delivered like gospel. Claire's car wouldn't start Thursday morning, so I walked their dog, Biscuit, twice. His leash tugging me past the fence. Poppy still swore I'd painted wrong. And then Thursday night the storm hit. Rain came down so hard it sounded like static on the roof. The power in their house went out around 8, and I saw the porch light die from my kitchen window, and something in my chest pulled me across the yard before I even decided to go. I found them huddled on the front steps, Poppy wrapped in a blanket, flashlight under her chin, mid-ghost story. Claire looked up at me with rain in her hair and something unguarded in her eyes for just a second, before she caught herself and smiled instead. I brought over hot chocolate, the good kind, cinnamon on top. We sat on those steps until the power came back, Poppy's ghost story getting wilder with every flash of lightning, Biscuit's head heavy on my knee, and for a moment, just a moment, it felt less like 3 people sitting on a porch, and more like something that already belonged together. That's when Claire told me about Daniel. Not all at once. In pieces, the way truth comes out when it's still healing. A drunk driver. A rain-soaked road. A phone call at 11 at night that split her whole life into before and after. Poppy had been 6. Claire had spent the first year, in her words, underwater and just now learning how to swim. I told her about my wedding. About standing at the altar in my mind for weeks before I ever stood there for real, and realizing 3 weeks out that I wasn't afraid of marrying the wrong person. I was afraid of loving anyone enough to lose them. That's the thing nobody warns you about, Claire said quietly, staring at the rain. Love doesn't come with insurance. You just have to decide it's worth the risk anyway. Is it? I asked. Worth it? She looked at me for a long moment, longer than either of us was used to holding. I used to think I'd used up my whole heart already, she said. Turns out it grew a new room. I felt something crack open in my chest right then. The same crack that started the moment Poppy handed me that note. Only this time it didn't feel like fear. Felt like hope. Terrifying, reckless hope. Before I tell you what happened next, what I decided to do about that note, and what it cost both of us to say the truth out loud, I want to ask you for something. If the story is pulling at you the way it pulled at me while I lived it, hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell right now. Stories like this one don't come around often, and I don't want you to miss where this one goes. Trust me, it gets so much bigger from here, because Friday wasn't really about a crayon note anymore. Not by the time it arrived. Friday was about whether two broken people, both convinced they'd already used up their chance at love, were brave enough to try again, in front of a little girl who'd already decided the answer for both of them. I walked over to their house that evening with the note folded in my pocket, my heart pounding harder than it had on my actual wedding day. Poppy answered the door first, eyes lighting up like she already knew. "Well?" she said. "Yes or no?" Behind her, Claire appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel, trying and failing to look like she wasn't holding her breath. And I realized, standing there on that porch with the rain long gone and the whole sky clear above me, that I hadn't come to answer Poppy's question at all. I come to ask one of my own. I stood on that porch with the note folded in my pocket, and instead of answering Poppy's question, I asked Claire one of my own. "Can I take you both to dinner? Not as neighbors. As something more, if you'll let me." Poppy's mouth fell open like I'd just announced fireworks. Claire's dish towel slipped straight out of her hands. For a second, nobody moved. The porch light flickered on above us, like the house itself had been waiting on the answer too. "Yes," Claire said, barely above a whisper, like she was testing the word to see if it would hold her weight. Then louder, like she believed it this time. "Yes." Poppy let out a shriek that probably woke half the street, fists pumping in the air like she'd personally won a championship. "I told you the note would work. I'm a genius. I should be a professional matchmaker." I laughed so hard my ribs ached, and Claire laughed with tears already sliding down her face, and Biscuit barked at all of us like he wanted in on the moment too. That dinner turned into a Sunday tradition. Every week, the three of us at the same table, Poppy narrating every meal like a food critic with strong opinions about ketchup placement. Slowly, carefully, the walls both Claire and I had built around our hearts started coming down. Brick by brick, dinner by dinner. She told me more about Daniel. Not the sanitized version people give strangers, but the real one. How she still set his coffee mug out some mornings without thinking. How she cried in the shower where Poppy couldn't hear her. How guilt crept in every time she felt something close to happy again. Like joy itself was a betrayal of the life they used to have. I told her about the wedding I called off. Not because I didn't love the person standing across from me, but because I was terrified of building a life with someone and then watching it get taken away, the way things get taken away without warning, without asking permission first. That fear doesn't just disappear, Claire told me one night, after Poppy had fallen asleep between us on the couch. You just decide it's not allowed to run your life anymore. I didn't kiss her that night. I waited 2 more weeks, until an evening on that same porch, Biscuit asleep across both our feet, Poppy's nightlight glowing gold in the window above us. And when I finally did kiss her, it didn't feel like something new. It felt like something that had been quietly, patiently waiting for both of us to catch up. I proposed the following spring, on the exact anniversary of the day Poppy handed me that note. A detail I never told either of them I'd been counting toward. I didn't plan a speech. I didn't need one. I knelt down in their backyard, right by the fence Poppy still insists I painted wrong, and pulled the original note out of my wallet, worn soft after months of being carried everywhere. Crayon a little faded now, but every word still legible. "Will you marry my mommy? Circle yes or no." I held it out to Claire, and with the same blue pen I'd used to help Poppy with her homework a dozen times, I circled yes. Claire's hands were shaking so hard she almost couldn't hold the paper. And Poppy, who had appeared out of nowhere with the tactical precision of a child who'd been listening at a window the entire time, let out a scream that startled every bird on the block. "I told you the note would work," she yelled, launching herself into both of our arms at once. I should get like a medal, or my own show. Claire was laughing and sobbing in the same breath, the paper clutched to her chest like it was the most precious thing she owned. Because it was. "Yes," she said, looking at me like the answer had been sitting there the whole time, just waiting for both of us to stop being afraid. "Yes, obviously, yes." We married that October, right there in the backyard under a fence that, Poppy will tell anyone who listens, was by then painted perfectly. She walked down the aisle first, scattering flower petals with the same fierce concentration she'd once poured into crayon letters. When she reached the front, she turned to face the whole crowd, held up a brand new sign she'd made just for the occasion, and grinned wider than I'd ever seen her grin. Said, "Told you so." I think about that crayon note almost every single day. Not because it was funny, though it was, but because it taught me something I needed to learn the hard way. Sometimes the people who see the truth clearest aren't the ones who've lived the longest. Sometimes it's the ones who haven't yet learned how to be afraid of it. So here's what I want to ask you before you go. Is there someone in your life you've been too scared to circle yes for? Someone you've been protecting yourself from instead of letting yourself love? Because Poppy taught me that love doesn't wait for you to feel ready. It just waits for you to be brave enough to answer honestly. If this story moved you even half as much as it moved me to live it, subscribe to this channel and turn on that notification bell. There are so many more stories like this one waiting for you, and I don't want you to miss a single one.